Late. So my name is Andy Mills. I work for an organisation called the Consultation Institute. Waterfront have asked me to chair today, which I'm really happy to do. The area of social value, particularly around infrastructure schemes, is something that I'm personally interested in. I was just talking offline to one of the panel members about some work I'm going to do immediately after this on an infrastructure scheme with some commissioners and engineers who perhaps find this a challenging area for their own expertise and an area of learning for them. So if there is a group of those folk on the call, I hope what you're going to hear today is going to be really enlightening and will kind of whet your appetite for further involvement in work around social value and involving people in defining what that is and making sure that they get the outcomes that they would like from the schemes that are being developed. So I'm going to introduce the three speakers very briefly, and then when they come to their turn, they're going to introduce themselves in a bit more detail. Once we've heard from each of them, and they're only going to give us between 5 and 10 minutes, so we've then got a Q&A session that I'm going to chair. There's a button at the bottom of the screen which says Q&A. So when you're ready to ask a question, if you put it into that box that should appear once you click on it, then I can start to collate those questions and make sure that I point them at the person that I think is most appropriate to answer. So without any more delay, let me introduce you quickly to the three speakers. First up today is going to be James Green from Butte Energy. James, you can see from his biog, has a career already in kind of climate work and energy efficiency. He's going to be talking about a scheme that his organisation are starting in, is it Mid Wales, James?
All across Wales.
All across Wales. And the community benefits programme, particularly around that and how that relates to social value, and just wants to kind of share that as a bit of good practice. And get some feedback perhaps about that. Next up will be Mariana Gonçalves from Savills, who's going to be talking about the kind of approaches that have been taken in the past to social value and how perhaps they might be changing in the future. And then finally, we're going to hear from Chris Buret from Temple. And Chris is going to be talking about some very specific examples, new approaches to social value that she thinks we might learn from and apply to this area of work. So, James, would you mind taking us through your session to start with?
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you, Andy. And a pleasure to meet everyone. Maxine, if you'd be able to share the screen for my presentation, that'd be great. Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm James from Butte Energy. Specifically the community benefits team at Butte Energy, and the title of my role is social mapping, monitoring, evaluation, and learning lead. And social value plays a big role in my work and the work of the team I'm part of, and the vision and mission of Butte Energy at large. And hopefully I'll be able to unpack as to why social value is so important to us. So just a bit of an introduction to Butte Energy. Our ambition is to power Wales with clean, green energy and empower communities for investment, jobs, skills, and we are based in Wales. I'm calling in from Cardiff today. I can see the Millennium Stadium from my desk as we speak. And we're developing a unique solution for Wales with decisions made in Wales. So along with most countries around the world, Wales is suffering a climate emergency and is struggling with a cost of living crisis. And we know that our energy supplies are threatened by current world events, but we at Butte are acting now, taking positive proactive steps to help address these issues for investment in rural communities in Wales and enabling a better future for local communities and the country. So we're developing onshore energy parks across Wales and addressing the grid challenges by developing adjoining grid routes to not all of our proposed projects through an ID&O line through our sister organisation GreenJet Cymru. And these projects we hope will achieve Welsh and UK government net zero targets for 2030 and 2050. and reduce our reliance on imported energy and bring down energy bills. And we're committed to ensuring as much of that investment stays in Wales as possible and create a legacy of tangible social value, helping secure the well-being of future generations. Next slide, please, Maxine. So Welsh communities stand to gain much more than just the broad advantages of large-scale onshore wind development. And those advantages obviously include decarbonisation, energy security, and cost reduction. But it's also an opportunity for developers to make a genuine commitment to responsible and impactful projects through community benefit funds. And this fund is not just about giving back, but also engaging positively with local communities, businesses, and organizations, and looking and exploring and inquiring into their unique needs and ensuring that we're leaving a lasting legacy. And one of Bute Energy's ambitions is to deliver best practice community benefits with each of our energy park projects. So we've mobilized a dedicated and specialized community benefits team who are responsible for delivering thematic benefit through support to partners in maximizing the impact of our investments, and together creating a positive legacy in community surrounding our projects, both the energy parks and the grid lines. And to give you an idea of the size of the fund we're talking about here, each megawatt of installed capacity, £7,500 goes into community benefit fund, and we're extending that fund along our adjoining grid routes as well. So in total, the independently governed community benefit fund will mean an investment of 800 million over 40 years for the communities near our projects, if all those projects are approved, of course. So if you could just click on once more, there we go. Thanks, Maxine. So at Bute Energy, we're committed to the communities close to our projects, and our dedicated team explores opportunities and engages communities for participation and identifies locally based projects to invest our community benefit fund. And this includes targeted investment across multiple themes, driven by the input we receive from the community. So these themes include social mobility, where we're creating work and opportunities and engaging with the youth, looking at designing centres of excellence across Wales to develop skills and look at those much needed skill sets for these kind of projects into the future. There's an education theme, providing renewable energy education to local institutions. We're exploring recreation and health, enhancing access to recreation and, well, health activities, and environment and culture, promoting local Welsh culture, heritage, and exploring environmental projects that, again, are sensitive to the communities and areas local to the project. And of course, cost of living, collaborating to address the cost of living crisis many communities are facing, with a focus on energy efficiency as well. So each one of these themes has a designated lead, who are my colleagues, the community benefits team, and we work closely with the community to understand the specific needs and identify potential projects in the local area. So one of the other offerings we have on our team is green skills. So our early strategy is centered around working to build the capacity of a local supply chain so that they're able to grow into larger contracts and maximize local employment and training opportunities. And we're working with our tier 1 contracts to leave a legacy of vocational skills. And we're working with local colleges and schools to support green or STEM subjects and create broader skills and awareness in these communities. We have quite an interesting staff volunteering policy, where each member of the Bute Energy and Green Gen Cymru team have to volunteer 4 full days or 8 half days at a time to support communities close to our projects. And this can be activities such as litter picks, community garden, painting and decorating public spaces, but we also want to be ambitious of how we mobilize the niche expertise of our team. So, for example, a member of our team has excellent understanding on the feasibility study for installing photovoltaics. So he's working with a local community group currently to support them in not only the feasibility for their building, but how we can mobilize the social value in our supply chain, so a supply can provide panels to that group. So it's mobilizing our niche skills in unique ways. We also have sponsorship and charity fundraising. We have Charity of the Year program, where we provide financial donations to our chosen charities over 3 years. Currently, these are St David's Hospice, based in South Wales, and the DPJ Foundation, who work with rural communities in supporting mental health challenges in agricultural practices and work. And we support with regular donations, and we have sponsorship and charity events. And finally, on this slide, we have the social value portal. So we're co-designing with Ants, who are an organisation based in Manchester and South Wales, focused on social value. And we're co-designing a one-stop shop platform for those wishing to access our grants. But this platform will also record and measure social value for our partnerships and projects. So this works both ways. It will allow us to monitor and evaluate and learn from the grants and projects we award, but also provide the organisation receiving the grant with useful evidence and data so they can use this for further grant tenders and submissions, whether that be with ourselves or the National Lottery Community Benefit Fund, for example. Next slide, please, Maxine. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how we capture the data, because at this stage of the process, we're very much conducting a systems inquiry. All our projects are in the development stage and a shovel is yet to go into the ground. But if we begin to understand the communities, understand their place-based challenges and needs, that will give us a really good upper hand when the projects go live, so we can just award opportunities and grants and funding as soon as it goes live. So we recognize the climate crisis as complex, but it's an interconnected issue, often referred to as a wicked problem. And this is characterized by emergent and systemic feedback loops in a wicked challenge, which are within an integrated system. So it's a bit of systems thinking talk there. But we're addressing such problems in multiple systems, and this is why we've identified specific themes and adopted holistic whole systems approach when collaborating with our communities. So we place a great emphasis on contextual sensitivity, and we're ensuring we're gathering quantitative and qualitative data that offers a comprehensive insight into the unique place-based challenges of each of the communities we engage with. And bear in mind, these communities span from South Wales, Mid Wales to North Wales, so they're all very diverse, or very different and vibrant. So once we collected the data, we employ data visualization techniques to understand the interdependence amongst challenges and identify emerging patterns, and interrogate the data to see where the vicious circles are and how they could be turned into virtuous ones, perhaps. And we collaborate with community members to validate their relevance to their community. You can kind of see a little bit of that visualization there on the screen. So with any engagement in our community, it's really important to understand their specific needs and aspirations. And to achieve this, we approach each community as an integrated system. So during our meetings with organizations within the community, we gather our qualitative data through semi-structured interviews or just well-facilitated workshops, and this helps aid us in identifying context-sensitive place-based challenges. And then these challenges are then aligned with community benefit themes and they're visually mapped. And we map the interdependence between these challenges, drawing direct connections, as you can see in that visualization, not only between the challenges themselves, but also among the community groups working to address them. And through this comprehensive understanding, this allows us to ideate potential interventions or investments and recognizing leverage points within the system. So a leverage point might be an organization who is addressing challenges across multiple themes, and those challenges they're directly addressing might have a cascade of benefit across the system. So this might turn a vicious circle maybe around antisocial behavior, because there's a lack of things for young people to do in the local region because there's a lack of public funding. If the intervention is supporting young people and getting them engaged with the local community, this might reduce antisocial behavior, the burden on the state, education attainment, so on and so forth. So that's turning a vicious circle into a virtuous one and finding those leverage points. And by utilizing a data-driven approach and a whole systems approach, we can not exactly solve these place-based challenges, but we can convene and align a network of stakeholders. I'm realizing I'm running out of time, so I'll quickly go on to the next slide, Maxine, please. So this is the final slide I'll speak to, which is directly on social value. So one of our ambitions is to deliver best practice, of course, for energy parks. But we also want to work with our partners as well, which can include delivery contractors, suppliers, consultants, community partners, stakeholders, and governmental departments, for example. And we expect them to contribute money, time, and expertise for the benefit of the communities relevant to their contracts. And this contribution must come from each contractor partner's own budget and not added any way to the contract budget. So we expect a minimum contribution of 2% of the overall contract value to be made up of staff time, employment, training opportunities, sponsorship, pro bono advice, maybe consulting service, or in the case of maybe some of our legal contracts, just donation of funding or specific activities or projects. So we have our social value standards, which is aligned with the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Wales Bill, and we're keeping money local and jobs in Wales and retaining value for the Welsh economy, communities, business organisations. And this standard, the social value standard, will support partners working to deliver our green energy solutions for Wales, and will provide them with guidance on the delivery of a cohesive network of social value, encouraging pooling of resources for increased benefits, and to ensure an inclusive menu of support to help strengthen communities. So we're supporting our partners to invest the resources in delivery of community benefits, generating tangible social value for communities in our surrounding projects. And yeah, we expect our partners to work with our theme leads I described earlier, where employment is the key issue they must address through their social value, but they can also explore some of the other themes as well, with a minimum of 2 others besides employment. So that could be recreation, health, environment and culture, education. And we're hoping that this skills development and working with possible local education and training providers, this outlasts the lifetime of our projects and really creates legacy in the local area. So I think I'm over time, so I'll perhaps leave it there, Andy.
All right, no, that's brilliant, James. You covered a massive area there, so thank you very much. I think there's a couple of areas that I'd like to ask you questions on, not least that wind is right at the forefront of the news today and over the last few weeks. So I think there's something kind of about your sector that we might talk about a bit more. Could I ask Mariana if she'll pick up the baton now?
Yes, will do, Andy. Let me just share my screen. There we go, you should be able to see it now. So yeah, thank you, Andy and James. So I work for Savills. Sorry, my name is Maria de Gonçalves, and I'm a senior sustainability consultant at Savills. So I don't know if you've heard about Savills, but we are a global real estate provider, and I work in the property management division within sustainability consultancy. I provide social value support and general sustainability support to institutional investors and individual assets, but also developers. And I mainly work on commercial assets, so there's logistics, offices and shopping centres, but sometimes I also work on residential projects. I'll talk about how the way we talk about social value has changed in the last few years and how we now capture social value information. So moving on to the next slide. So starting with, sorry, my Zoom is doing something funny here. There we go. So if you look at the top of the screen, the top half of the screen, I just listed some of the governmental legislation that came up in the last decade. When the government, before the government published the Social Value Act, they had a definition of social value, which was all about cost benefit, which I think is a natural definition of social value for the government, because it's all about supporting local communities and society as a whole. And they talked about social value encompassing a broad concept of value by incorporating social, environmental, and economic costs and benefits. When I started working within the social value discipline about 4 years ago, most conversations were about monetizing the value of interventions. And I'll explain a little bit about that on the next slide. But now I feel most conversations are about quality of life, about the impact that an intervention has on someone or on a local community. And there's a lot more narrative, a lot more quantitative information as well, rather than providing just a pound figure of social value for each initiative that's implemented. So again, looking at the top half of the screen, when the government published 3 main bits of legislation and procurement guidance recently. So in 2020, they were talking about explicitly evaluating, they were talking about considering social value outputs as part of procurement contracts. Then in 2020, they talked about explicitly evaluating social value as part of procurement contracts. And then in 2021, they provided a bit more guidance about the types of national priorities that every governmental department should try to address. Then the bottom of the screen has some examples of industry publications. And in real estate, in most cases, there's no legal requirement for social value in the projects I work with. But there are other reasons that organizations and projects choose to focus on social value, and the industry guidance covers that. The focus is generally on local needs. So what James was saying earlier, understanding the impact that an initiative has, and be it positive or negative, on someone's life and the local community, and also improving quality of life. So I mentioned monetization earlier. There are three main things of recording social value. So if we look at the impact column, the blue one, if we look at what we are trying to create, there are three ways of recording what a project is doing to work towards that. So if we monetize the social value being generated, we are trying to attribute a financial value to something based on cost-benefit analysis, well-being valuation, etc. So I'll give an example. I use the first example on the screen, which is about good and fair jobs for local people. So if you try to record the social value being generated by that, so if you monetize it, you'd be looking at things like the pound value of employing a local person per year, or for example, employing someone who was on long-term employment creates X value, X amount of social value per year. If instead you focus on qualitative information, you may be looking at things like employee satisfaction surveys and the opinions of employees. Then if you look at the quantitative information, it's more about retention rate, which, sorry, I put in the wrong column, percentage of employees that live within the same local authority as the property, distance traveled to work, etc. So I feel like in the last year or last couple of years, our clients and projects are focusing a lot more on qualitative information and quantitative information, so the inputs, rather than trying to calculate the amount of social value that a project generates, because that can feel quite esoteric sometimes as well. So at the moment, most clients and projects are focusing on qualitative and quantitative reporting, but I also feel like monetization still has a value. And for me, it's mainly when a client uses it to benchmark a project, one of their own projects, against one of their previous projects, to understand how they're improving over time. And the definition that I currently like to use when we talk about social value is by the UK Green Building Council. And the definition is about social value being created when buildings, places, and infrastructure projects support environmental, economic, and social well-being, and in doing so, improve the quality of life of people. And a key thing with the definition and with the way we deal with social value is that it needs to be about the local needs. So the outputs that create social value depend on the interests of the people affected. So there can be a local authority, there can be even a smaller area. And it's also about supporting disadvantaged people. So for example, helping vulnerable people live independently, supporting education and learning, promoting participation, giving people a voice or allowing people to use their voice, connectivity, interaction, and neighborliness. And then finally, on our current approach, so we used to do a lot more measurements before. We still do that. That's still valid in cases, but we're seeing a lot more. We have a lot more clients interested on qualitative and quantitative information, and we are really focusing on those local needs. So our general approach now involves four main stages. The first one is the local needs. So using a range of data sources at the beginning of a project, we work to understand the levels of deprivation in a particular area, the demographics, levels of affluence, for example. And then we carry out direct engagement, which varies depending on the type of asset and the type of project. So it can be tenant and visitor surveys, it can be direct engagement with residents or the local community. I think the databases are great to give you an idea of what the issues are in an area, but direct engagement also gives you an idea of concerns right now and the concerns of the people who are already using the asset. So for example, I've worked on a few shopping center projects this year, And across all shopping centre surveys, visitor surveys we did this year, mental health also always came up as a top 3 concern, even in places where data about mental health didn't show a particular concern. We often see that visitor surveys validate the findings of research, but not always, like in this case. Then the second step of our approach is a gap analysis for operational assets, or if it's a new project, construction project, it's a feasibility assessment. So for operational assets, we look at the way the management team is already delivering social value and make recommendations or create an action plan to help improve delivery and align it to the local needs. So we really try to join up those local needs with the recommendations we make. And for new projects, it's about understanding what's feasible and practical. Then the third step of our approach is to identify local partners that a site team or project team can work with to deliver a particular initiative. So they don't need to start from scratch and can work with or support an established organization. And then finally, we report or measure or provide ongoing support to projects. So this sometimes includes measuring social value and monetizing it, but also providing a narrative of how the delivery is aligned to needs, how it could be improved, providing a narrative of impact, and also quantitative information for on benchmarking. And often this includes ongoing support where we support the management or construction team throughout the project to really maximize impact and help create long-lasting value to the local community and helping create that legacy that James mentioned earlier. And that's it from me, Andy.
Brilliant, thank you. Stuff that I would love to come back to you on there around the direct contribution of real estate to mental well-being. If you've got any particular examples, maybe you could think about that before we come back to you.
Yeah, sure.
And also the kind of journey that you've laid out for us about where we are feels like a bit like a continuum that we go backwards and forwards between. It's about monetization, it's about quant, it's about qual. Be interesting to hear. I think you might have said where you think we are at the moment, but it'd be interesting to hear where you think we are on that continuum and where we might be in the future. Just before I bring Chris in, can I just remind folk that we're going to be going into a Q&A session at the moment, and it would be really helpful if people have begun to think about any of the questions they've got for James or Mariana, and potentially the questions that you're going to be asking Chris. That'd be really helpful. There's the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If you just click on that and start to type, it will give you an opportunity to ask questions. And as I say, I'll chair that session in a moment. So Chris, can I ask you to come in now and talk about these new approaches that you think we could benefit from thinking about?
Thank you, Andy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Burray. I was the Director of Social Research Associates, specialising in social aspects of transform planning with emphasis on inclusive engagement. So I do a lot of work with disabled people, digitally excluded, and people who would not normally answer webinars and online surveys. And in this capacity, I've led many projects, particularly difficult ones, controversial ones. Most recently was about the third runway at Heathrow. I've now sold the company to a company called Temple, who are specialists in environmental consultancy. And that's because sustainability has really moved up the social value agenda, and Temple have experts in noise and air quality and biodiversity, which is increasingly part of the engagement process. So in the 5 minutes I have, I want to talk about 2 examples of new approaches to involving communities. And my aim in doing this is I've been very perturbed lately about how many projects have got held up at early stages, either through judicial review or what some people have called NIMBYism. And you know, goodness knows we need to build more houses and infrastructure in this country. So I'm thinking about new approaches of how we can make that happen. by using the social value legislation, which Mariana has spoken about, but also in new ways. So thank you, Maxine, first. So I'm going to give two examples of new approaches, but an old approach, which I think is relative to this picture shows a citizens' jury at Leicester City Council, and there was, faced with budget cuts, this jury carried out a participatory budgeting exercise over several weekends, teaching themselves, having speakers from councillors and experts. In the end, they reached consensus. And what I have to say while I'm showing this picture is it got a lot of publicity in the press, but it also reduced delays. Something would have gone on for weeks and weeks debating in council committees. And this was a way of really reaching consensus in a very public way. So the second slide, please. So this is my first example, and I'm not going to describe it in detail because the link is there. It's the Bristol Energy Co-op. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about cooperatives, community ownership and investment. One of the things that people constantly ask me when I'm starting an engagement is what's in it for us? And if you take this example, the people who join this, and there are 1,500 investors involved in it. They do solar and wind installations. They give support for people's energy bills. They provide insulation services and community paybacks. And running as a co-op, the people do not feel that some, great big directors are earning millions of pounds in energy. It's all going back to the community, it's investing, and it makes them feel good. And what I'm really saying is, why aren't we doing more of these co-ops in relation to infrastructure development? I think one reason is that co-ops in this country have a kind of vaguely socialist feel to it, whereas in many other countries, it's seen as a form of self-help, a genuine community approach. And I think this is tailor-made for many of the big infrastructure projects. Somebody mentioned wind earlier. We know there have been a lot of opposition to wind. But if you feel it's really something in it for you in this very direct way, and you're involved in agreeing and saying where the placement is and so on, I think you feel good about that, and you feel quite different about doing it, even if there's some disadvantages to it. So that's my first point I want to make. Why aren't we setting up more co-ops within the context of social value? Third slide, please. This is my second example, and the theme here is I don't think we enough try to involve the people who are going to live in new developments. It's all about the people that already live there. These are the ones that are invited along to the exhibitions, and whose opinions are given, and whose decisions hold sway and often object to the development. So here's an alternative approach. This is a development at Staithes near Gateshead, on the old Gateshead Garden Festival site. And George Wimpey at that time decided that he was going to reply to all the criticisms of what was called Wimpification, and brought in Hemingway Designs, led by Wayne Hemingway, to do a different approach to it. And it involved, as well as local people, a lot of engagement with future residents and to develop the vision, to design the housing estate, and to, if you like, sell a sustainability vision to people. So they did things like they gave people much smaller dustbins than you would normally give. They decked cards so they didn't dominate the landscape. And they did a whole load of other things that people had suggested they would like. Also no two houses were the same. That was something people really wanted, a way to customize their building. And there were a lot of these unique sustainabilities. What was the result? The result apart from anything else, and talking about monification that Mariana mentioned, was a 10% uplift in price and profits here because people wanted to live here. Even before they got here, the so-called gumboots brigade, they had a sense of ownership. They'd met some of their neighbours already, and the whole scheme was a great success because it sold a vision as well as just asking people, what do you think? Last slide, please. So my conclusion is, when we engage, we should always be strategic about it. You know, so many people I meet think, oh, well, you know, it's nice to consult people, but they don't really think what they're trying to achieve by that consulting. They're not being canny in designing the consultation so that it does achieve the objectives of social value in the first place. There's definitely going to be an increase in legislation requiring consultation. More and more people are getting the hang of going for judicial review to hold things up. So this strategic approach is going to be so important in the future to just save money and be cost effective. Another thing I'll say in conclusion is there's an urgent need for skills development and engagement. I was talking to Andy earlier, and there is a feeling that unlike, say, you know, measuring air quality or building and avoiding concrete decline, engagement is something anyone can do. It's not the case, and we know very often that it's handed on to people who haven't a clue how to do it, and they often end up making it worse. And so what I'm kind of saying, it's an opportunity, it's not a problem, it's not a drag, it's not something you've got to do by legislation. And I finished really with that picture of people talking about, in that case, the North Devon Link Road. You know, new roads are always controversial, they are now. And the things people have said to me over the years, first of all, nothing for us without us. That's the motto, particularly the disability movement. And here's a final quote from someone who was still opposed to that ring road. He said to me, I've had my say, I still don't agree, but I see why others have supported it, and so I accept the decision. And that's sometimes as good as it gets with engagement. That's what I mean about a strategic approach to it. And at the bottom of that last slide, there's a reference to a toolkit which Temple now provide. You can see it on the web page. And also for the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transport, I've recently introduced an online webinar, which takes about 30 minutes to do, and you get a certificate for it. So it's back to what I'm saying about the need for skills, really. So new approaches, new thinking, strategic approaches, and it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. Thanks very much.
That was marvellous, Chris. And we've spoken before about this. Clearly, anybody who talks about participative budgeting, citizens' juries, citizens' assemblies, is all right in my book. Having said that, I'd like to hear kind of your reflection on maybe whether or not those kind of things are the latest fads, and whether or not we can all be distracted by kind of the latest thinking about that. And actually, I think you were talking about some more deeper principles that are perhaps behind all of those new methods that we're talking about. So perhaps you can come back to us on that. Okay, I'm going to open up the Q&A now. We're not inundated with questions at the moment, which means you're going to be using me as your kind of surrogate questioner of the panel if you're not careful. So I would commend you to add a few more questions into the chat if possible. But Mariana, you're first up with a question that Anonymous has sent in, that's asked, would you give us any social value examples for the industrial assets? Are you able to kind of comment on that side of the business?
Yes, so I work with quite a few industrial assets during the construction phase, so I can give you examples of construction. So when we work with them, we do the local needs, as I mentioned earlier. And for example, there was one project where we identified that unemployment was a key issue in the local area, and especially I think it was gender inequalities. So what we've done is we are working with the construction company, and we've put them in touch with the job centre to put those connections in place. So the construction company is now providing training to people who were previously on long-term unemployment, and the job centre has funded their CSCS cards, which is a construction certification card. So now they're working together to employ, I think, 6 people at the moment, who are all going to work in this construction project, and then in the future we'll be able to, we'll have the skills to be employed by another construction project. So that helps address the unemployment issue in the area. It's of course is one project, is quite small, but it's what the project can do. There's another one that I was working on last year, where we identified that the local community was much older than the average in the region, and the local council had a priority of helping people live independently. So we put, again, a construction project in touch with a dementia centre, which an operational part of the asset was already working with. So there's already like a link and a long-lasting relationship. And they've helped the dementia centre. They built a path in the garden for the dementia centre. So now users of the centre can use the garden, and there's a new gazebo. So it helped improve health and well-being of the service users. And they are now working with, there's another project in this same area, and the construction company is already talking about working with them again. So it's trying to build those connections, create those connections, and then make sure they're long-lasting.
Thank you, Marianne. We had another question coming from Bernie. Are there any specific social value toolkits for measuring social value for infrastructure projects that you could recommend? I don't think that's aimed at anybody particular, but anyone on the panel wish to pick that up? Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I've given a few references to toolkits which can be used, and the measurement of them is something which is developing, and I think there's some really good new ideas on that. So I think there's a lot around, and if anyone wants to contact us via the waterfront later on, I'm sure we could put together a page of references.
Brilliant. And maybe other members of the panel could kind of contribute to that as well. That'd be really helpful for people. A question from Dominic: is there any best practice advice for organisational buy-in for social value in the procurement process to avoid people perceiving social value as a barrier to schemes and development? James, because I think you were talking a bit about your kind of procurement processes, are you using any of your own kind of best practice or pulling in best practice to how you actually get the best out of your procurement processes?
Yeah, so we do have our own bespoke social value standard. Again, I think I touched on this earlier, where we expect 2% of the contract value to go to social value initiatives, where this is more of a focus of in-kind, rather than sort of just a check or money handed over. So we expect maybe internships opportunities, employment opportunities, and working with local institutions, maybe schools close to the communities near our projects, and we try and encourage local supply chain percolation near those sites. So if there's best practice, I suppose this is very much an emergent process for us. And we're very much at the start of our social value journey and developing our standard. But I think a North Star for us is the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Bill in Wales, and how that is obviously focused on the public sector. But it does provide us with a clear navigational path and North Star, if you will, to delivering social value. I think what I can say is that it is an emergent space we're finding in the tender process, and it is becoming more common. And what we're offering our suppliers is social value accredited training. So come November, I think we're offering Each of our suppliers the opportunity for a 3-day course guided by Ants, that's Ants with a Z, who deliver social value training and the best practice of social value and implementation in contracts.
Okay,
So
brilliant.
yeah, it's just we're offering an accredited training as part of our social value standard as well.
Okay, and I know, having been on the other end of the Q&A, you know, being put on the spot can sometimes be a bit daunting. But Mariana or Chris, have you got anything you could add about kind of best practice or approaches to kind of procurement that people could benefit from, or is it part of that same idea you said, Chris, about putting something together for people in written form?
Well, what I would say is that there is a definite role for technical input here, because if you just ask people, what do you think? They will only come up with traditional perspectives of what they want. So we in the industry have a lot of technical expertise, for instance, new thinking on soundscapes, positive odor development. If you can put those ideas to people, then the social value that emerges and the ideas can be better informed. And I think it's a circular process. So, for instance, near me at London Bridge here, Edge are developing a massive, great office development, and it is going to have a really nice park at the side, but it doesn't tell you anything about it on the building. It doesn't show you what it's going to look like. It doesn't tell you a park is coming here. So all we know is it's a hell of a nuisance, lots of noise, lots of dust, lots of congestion, and what's in it for us. So we're not learning about social value as a community. And so I think that, you know, developers could do a lot more to actually publicize the social value they're building into these things rather than keep it in documents.
Mariana, have you got any comments? I think particularly about the kind of approach to procurement that I think the questioner was after.
Yeah, so I don't deal with procurement a lot, but from trying to answer tenders that ask questions on social value, I think from the perspective of someone answering it, it's defining what social value means. I think that's missing a lot of the time, because for some people, social value is the social elements of sustainability. For others, it's everything. It's environmental, social, economic impact. So I think that definition is often missing. And then also what that means for that local community, because you can ask the different people tendering to try and identify what the needs are, but it's so much easier and resource efficient if you tell them what the needs are and what needs you're trying to address as a contracting authority.
Okay. Whilst you're there, Mariana, could we just go back a second? And I should have followed this up at the time when the questioner asked about industrial assets. You mentioned mental health outcomes from real estate business, if you like. Could you just say a bit more about if there are any examples that you've got about how that actually comes about?
Yes, so I can think of examples of how to address, how to support mental health outcomes. So for example, it depends on the stakeholders, it depends on the project, but I'll just mention some things I can think of. So for example, employees, it's about offering mental health support to employees, offering training, making sure you have mental health first aiders on site, especially sites that are at risk. We have, I'm aware of some sites that have like physical elements of the assets that create more mental, that can be issues in relation to mental health. Access to resources, mental health first aiders I mentioned. For visitors, for example, a shopping centre could offer space to mental health charities or organisations in the local area, so visitors have access to those organisations, and the organisations don't need to have their own space. And there's also in real estate, there's health and wellbeing certifications, which I think are key for this, because they provide a framework for improving the health and well-being of building users, of employees, of any visitors. And that can include things like active travel, so offering bike racks, showers, etc. And that helps improve physical health, but also mental health. But the certifications are things like Fit Well and Well, and they both have examples of things that can be done. They talk about promoting walkability. They talk about different working areas or different working zones for different preferences. So it could be a quiet room for people who prefer to work in a quiet space. It could be more meeting rooms. It could be more informal places of work. They talk about events as well. So shopping centers are a good example for this. They can have events that bring people together, that promote activity, promote connection, bring those organizations together as well. There's also comfort, so noise, lighting, space, or universal accessibility. Those are all things that end up affecting mental health. Multi-purpose rooms, quiet rooms, etc. And also, I think the key thing is going back to the local needs. So, for example, satisfaction survey, asking tenants and visitors what they feel the center or the office or the logistics park is missing, and trying to address those needs, because those are the people who are using the assets, so they're the ones who know what needs to be, what could help improve their own mental health.
Okay, great. So there aren't lots of other questions, but I would like to indulge myself, but hopefully find something that's useful for other people by just coming back to James to ask about the community benefit approach that you spoke about, James. The energy sector is in the news, wind is in the news. Whether we're going to have more wind or less wind, I don't mean the wind itself, I mean the way in which we harness the wind. And therefore, will there be more approaches like your community benefits approach, do you think, across the sector, or does it already exist? Should this be something that we should all be kind of thinking about and tapping into?
Yeah, I think there's strong evidence of this previously existing with wind developers, particularly onshore, and photovoltaics as well. Now, my understanding is that the government has no formal role in enforcing or statutorily acquiring community benefits, but I think in the DNO or DNS process here in Wales, I think it would help with the consent. But I'd say it is common for renewable energy projects to make a financial in-kind contribution to local communities. And we've seen best practices of that in Wales previously. There's one of the largest onshore wind developments, certainly in Wales, perhaps in the UK, is called Pen y Cymoedd, and that reaches from Neath to Aberdare, I think. It's about 76 turbines, and something in the region of 220, 230 megawatts. And that has an impressive community benefit to offer. I've met with a team, and they employ an independent panel who engage with the community, and they manage the 300 million community benefit fund over the project lifetime. I think what we're doing, though, is we do see ourselves as leaders of Bute Energy because we have what we believe to be the largest in-house team where we are working across those themes. And we are working before the point of development. So we're doing that systems inquiry, gathering the data, we're understanding the place-based challenges and needs, and convening and have almost like a value network ready to mobilize for when the grants go live. Typically, you're seeing about £5,000 per megawatts of installed capacity. We're doing 7,500. That's because we have the adjoining grid route as well, which are extending the community benefits along. So I think it has been common, but I do see what we're doing is taking that step forward. I think having the in-house team, going a bit further with the fund, and being ambitious with social value as well, and ensuring that we're having that localized supply chain percolation close to our sites.
Okay, brilliant. Chris, can I just come back to you perhaps as we reach the end of the time that we've got? I'd like, if you would, you've left me with a soundbite, which I think is really important, about social value in the infrastructure sector is an opportunity. It's not a nice to have or an obstacle to overcome. Could you say anything kind of in some closing remarks to leave us with, perhaps, around the fact that this is an opportunity that could be made more of?
Yes, I think it goes back to being clear what we're asking people when we engage. So some people may be familiar with the hierarchy of participation, Hannah Arendt's ladder of participation. And our own toolkit starts with, are you telling people something? Are you asking them something? Are you discussing something with them? Or are you asking them and saying you can decide something? And some of the biggest mess ups I've known and delays to planning have been where people thought they were deciding, and in fact, you were just telling them. So be clear at the beginning. And that's why, for instance, the citizens jury worked very well, because a commitment was made in advance to seriously take on board those recommendations. Whereas another jury I was involving for a local council, they spent 3 weekends looking into a local development issue, and then the chairman of the relevant committee came along and said, oh, well, we'll never be doing that. And of course they went away and the press was negative and so on, misunderstanding. They were just being asked, not deciding. So I think back to that strategic approach, and if you get it right, then you won't have the delays we're experiencing of people opposing development.
That's a great kind of rounding up statement about this being a strategic thing and therefore a strategic opportunity. Can I round up the session then, everybody? Thank you very much. I don't think we've got any further questions. Can I thank the 3 panel members for you on behalf of Waterfront, and just also commend Waterfront to you for some further work that they're doing in this area. They have a social value consultation, stakeholder engagement and infrastructure event on the 19th of October, and an EIA masterclass on the 6th of December. So if you're not already a subscriber to Waterfront, please kind of check out their upcoming program for other things which you might find helpful. So I think we're more or less bang on time. Thank you ever so much for participating today. I think most people stayed with us, which is always a good sign, and that this is there for forever and ever, for people to be able to visit as many times as they want, to kind of pick out whatever they want from what the 3 speakers have said. So thank you very much for your time today, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.